Sound design is something we don't often consider when thinking about the creation of new video games, which is weird because it's usually very integral to the overall experience of the game. With that in mind, we don't all know where to begin in becoming a video game sound designer, and I am one of those people. So let's open our doors and wise up, because it's time to learn how to become a video game sound designer. Sound design is a very wide-reaching field involving a range of other industries, and it usually plays a supporting role to a main creative field, whether that be sound design for video games, films, theatre, live performance or anything else. It's usually not the main part of a piece of media, though sound design is always integral to any of these media forms. As a beginner who is interested in the idea of sound design as a career prospect, it can often be quite daunting to get started, so I aim to provide a guide on how to get into the field as a beginner and what to expect through all levels of this career. In this guide, I'm going to focus more specifically on sound design for video games. Though I have never worked in sound design professionally, I have been speaking to a couple of incredible sound designers over a few weeks and have hopefully gained a lot of knowledge about the ins and outs of the industry, and of course sound design specifically. Later on in the video, I'll be speaking to two experienced video game sound designers, Sam Clark and Toby Ellis. And while I may not have worked on any games myself in any capacity, at all, I do have experience composing with imagery in mind and using found sounds with video, so some of the credentials are there, I guess. And of course I have spent many hundreds, possibly thousands of hours of my life playing games with the audio set to on, so I like to think that I'm sitting at a good starting point. Growing up in the 2000s, video games have always been a big part of my life, and I'm sure for many of you watching, you're in the same boat. Also being a musician, it seems that these two paths would cross at some point, music on one side, video games, put them together, sound design for video games. Sort of makes sense why I've been drawn towards this recently. In order to understand how important sound is in this context, all we need to do is go and play our favourite games, but without the sound on. In fact, go do that now. Wait, no, please don't go. I'm sure you'll agree that your experience was greatly affected. Sound design is a very tricky thing to get right when it comes to video games because there are so many different facets to it. You can have an amazing soundtrack, but if your footsteps sound like they're recorded using a hairdryer, you're not going to get very good reviews. I don't think it's a coincidence that some of the most well-loved games of the last couple decades, like The Legend of Zelda or Rockstar's games or The Elder Scrolls, all tend to have very good soundtracks that are really iconic and everyone remembers them. I would argue that games like Breath of the Wild or Red Dead Redemption 2 or GTA 5 have some of the most immersive and comprehensive and well-made sound designs out of any games ever. So, how do I begin working in sound design for video games, I hear you cry? Well, the first thing you need is a passion for games, the second thing you need is a pair of functioning ears, and the third thing you need is a portfolio or showcase of some kind displaying your ability to work with sound. It doesn't have to be huge, but it's a good idea to start working on a portfolio as soon as possible because, as with most jobs, if there are two candidates to do the sound design on your new game, one of them has brought a couple of examples of them working with sound in a recording or mixing or audiovisual context, but the other candidate has no examples of this, they're going to pick the one with practical experience. Qualifications in the form of degrees or other educational formats are not as important as practical experience in the world of sound design in general. So, let's take a look at how to make a portfolio and what kind of things to include within it. A portfolio is basically a showcase of examples of work that you've done which are relevant to the job that you're looking to get. In our case, we're going to want to include things like videos with audio that display your ability to match visuals to sound, or any evidence that you've worked with software like Wise, for example. Maybe you've taken a course on it and you have a certificate or something. One thing that is important to get started on early is a sound library. This is basically a collection of sounds that you've either recorded yourself or purchased or otherwise have access to. All you really need to begin with this is a field recorder of some kind and space on your hard drive. For instance, my recorder is a fairly inexpensive Olympus LSP1 which cost me around 80 quid, and it has a little windbreaker on top to make it look like it has an anime hairdo, and using this setup and after editing it a little bit with some EQ, I was able to capture this fairly clear bird song last week. Having a sound library is very useful because if you keep adding to it, you'll eventually end up with a collection of sounds for basically any occasion. If you don't have a recorder yet, you may be able to get sound effects from other sources. For example, the software I use to edit videos is Final Cut Pro X, which comes equipped with a huge sound library already, with effects ranging from punches, to crowd ambience, to children cheering, and everything in between. There are also plenty of websites that you can download sound effects from for free, like freesoundslibrary.com, which has thousands of royalty-free effects which are under the license of Attribution 4.0 International. This means that you can use the effects for commercial and non-commercial projects, as long as it's appropriately credited. The main thing you probably want to include in a sound portfolio is a demo reel or video that showcases your best abilities to work with visuals and sound. Something that I'm working on for my portfolio is a complete sound design for a small video game map, which sounds complicated, but it's actually reasonably simple to get started with. All you need to do is download the Unity game engine and the middleware Wise, both of which are free to non-commercial consumers. Once you have these, you can download a pre-made in-game map to base your design on. Unity has many pre-made maps which are free to download and work with, and once you've watched a few tutorials for getting started with Unity and Wise, you can begin creating sounds, which you will then add to this map to suit the environment. I'll link a useful tutorial for this that I watched in the description. Once you've created the sound design and you've added it all into your map, you can then just make a video showing it all off and all the sounds and how they match the environment. You might have added characters with voice lines or an original score to the world. And as long as you present the work's quality and effort well, this sort of video will look very good in a portfolio, because it shows off your ear for good sound design, your attention to detail, your ability to work with implementation software, your video editing skills, and if you do the music as well, your compositional skills, all of which are obviously things that you want to show off. So it sort of goes without saying that having a good ear for sound and music is necessary to go towards a career in sound design, but there are other skills that you can start developing before that. I spoke to Sam Clark, who is a sound designer for Beanox based in Quebec, and I asked him about this. So there are skills outside of having a good ear that you need to think about as you pursue a career in the music industry. What are the most useful skills that aren't necessarily sound related, but they maybe are more on the technical side of things or on the social side, sort of things that you might not even think about as a beginner going into the industry?
So outside of sound, one of the most important things is to develop skills in engine. You will be working in a game engine, so it's important to know how to use a game engine. Unity and Unreal are great places to start there. They've got a lot of tutorials out there and they're free to dive into. Beyond that, it also helps to have an understanding of how the different disciplines involved in game development work, like understanding a little bit about how an artist does their job or a programmer does their job will make it a whole lot easier for you to work with them and create the best final product possible.
So what sort of things would you say a beginner can do before they start looking for work to develop these skills?
So for a beginner to develop those skills, as far as the engine stuff goes, download Unity, download Unreal, look up the tutorials. They've got some really solid stuff put together to get you up and running in engine and doing a little bit of basic implementation and development without too much requirement or without too much of a programming requirement. For learning how programmers and artists work and getting a bit of an interdisciplinary understanding, just talking to people, get a hold of people whose work you like, people who are, peers of yours. Just talk to them about their work. People will be more than happy to talk about what they do.
Thanks, Sam. So yes, of course, if you're in the same boat as me, i.e. quite musically inclined already and starting to take an interest in sound design as you think about a career, getting that initial experience working with software and game engines and talking to people who already work in these environments is going to help your understanding massively. It's quite easy to find people like this as well. I got in contact with Sam just by asking if anyone wanted to help me with this video in the r/game audio subreddit, and he was one of the many kindly people who offered. But moving away from that side of things, I spoke to Toby Ellis, who works as a music composer and sound designer for Videogame, and also does freelance work as an audio lead and composer. I asked him about how he got interested in sound design originally and what takeaways he took from doing his degree. We also talked about equipment like recorders. Take it away, Toby.
So yeah, I guess I had a real big sort of love and passion for doing music in film when I did my BSc in music comp and technology for film and games. And that sort of pathway, getting the understanding from the filmic music side of things and the game music side of things, kind of opened my eyes to what sound can do for a game environment as much as music can do for it, and kind of how it all ties together in a big production mix, and how you have to look at everything from a standpoint of, if you're the sound designer, you've got to be able to know sort of how the ambience and how these big punching sounds that you're making in like action set pieces have to correspond with the music and with the game environment, with the characters, with the storytelling. And yeah, I guess like mainly dawned on me at university. So these babies, so if you have any interesting questions about those, I'm like all for it. The definitely industry standard. This is one that you really want to get hold of if you can. I bought mine used when I was on my undergrad. But anyway, so these are used. I mean, these are always talked about as being widely used by professional sound designers.
Equipment's not necessarily a big expense, is it?
No, not necessarily. You can actually record. You'd be surprised to hear the amount of things that get recorded on iPhones or on on your smartphone, whatever. The important thing is just to be there and be sort of mindful of what's going on. It's more about your brain kicking in and going, "Oh, that's an interesting sound." Get the record button on.
And thank you, Toby. So yeah, we can make a step-by-step list of stuff to do to prepare for a career in sound design for video games. Step 1. Play lots of games for inspiration purposes, of course. Step 2. Seek out people who have this experience and people in collaborative mediums for game design and talk to them about it. They'll be more than willing to talk to you. Step 3. Begin collecting sounds and start a sound library. You can even use your phone's recorder for this if you don't want to buy a Zoom mic. Step 4. Start developing skills in game engines and implementation software. Unity and Wise are free and industry standard, and they have many tutorials available. And finally, step 5, gather all your work together into a portfolio or a showcase, ready to be sent off with your resume to prospective employers. So hopefully you now have a much better idea of what to do in order to start your career in sound design for video games. I want to thank Sam and Toby, as well as Beatrix and Moash, for imparting their knowledge on me. It was extraordinarily helpful, and I literally couldn't have made this video without you, so thanks you guys. And I'll thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye bye.